Hey everybody, it's Mike Johnson back in the audio section of PWInsider Elite. NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, has now for several weeks been presenting NWA Powerrr at 6:05 p.m. every Tuesday on the NWA Facebook page, the NWA YouTube page, and it'll be debuting very soon on Fight.tv. It's been an interesting several years for the National Wrestling Alliance since it was purchased by our guest at this time. You know him as the frontman of the Smashing Pumpkins, Billy Corgan, but those of us in the wrestling circles know him as the NWA president, William Corgan, someone who has had a huge passion for professional wrestling and has quite a few adventures in the world of professional wrestling over the years dating back to the late 1990s in the original ECW, and then obviously his involvement with Impact Wrestling and a number of other ventures, with all roads leading to Tuesday nights at 6:05 p.m. Eastern for NWA Powerrr. Billy, how are you, sir? It's good to talk to you. I guess the first question is, what is your response to the positive reaction to the NWA Powerrr series online? Very rare to see a negative response about the show thus far, which even for 2 weeks is pretty much a miracle on the internet. So, what are your thoughts, sir?
We've just been blown away. We certainly, thought we would do fine, but the numbers and the feedback from the fans has just been overwhelming. I mean, we're 20 times further along than we thought we'd be at this point. So it shows that the last couple of years investing and working with different companies and building relationships in the business have really paid off. Word of mouth, got around, and certainly to AEW's credit and of course many others, New Japan, this let's call it this alternate universe, this non-WWE universe, professional wrestling is kind of kicking into another gear, and we're able to ride that wave at the same time as well.
Now you were someone who invested in Impact Wrestling, and it didn't go well.
$1.83 million, Mike, if you want to be specific.
Okay, $1.83 million. You had to legally pursue to get it back. Hopefully you did get it all back.
I got it all back. Yes, I did. Every penny.
So my question is, had you not gone through that trial by fire, how different would your involvement in professional wrestling be right now? Like, before we talk a little bit about NWA, I just want to talk the Impact question. Had things worked out there, do you think you would be in a similar position today as you are currently, or do you think your involvement in wrestling would have probably changed or been finished by now? Like, how much of that story and the negative that came with that story ended up becoming this positive for you? And how different do you think your journey in professional wrestling, as someone who wanted to create and cultivate their own company and create their own vision of what wrestling should be, how different do you think it would have been if the Impact thing had worked out?
That's a really great question. I think one piece of data that's important is that, and it goes back to the court case that I was involved with against Impact or whoever was, it was very complicated. Dixie Carter was certainly involved. The numbers as far as the debt of the company at that point were vastly underreported. And so if I had managed to take over the company, it would have been a far more complicated mess than I could have ever imagined. And so along those lines, it's hard for me to imagine I could have sort of ridden out the debt. That said, let's set that aside and let's just play fantasy booking. I felt that because I'd been there almost 2 years, that I understood the culture, I understood the talent, and I felt I could very quickly pivot towards something that's similar to the vision of the NWA. Where it doesn't match up is that the thing you cannot really wrap your arms around until you're in it and until you feel it every day is once you take on the historical legacy of the NWA and you start to really embrace what that really means to so many wrestling fans and how it's commensurate with the vision that I had already, which was that traditional wrestling will always work. I don't care if trends come and go. But the idea of telling a good story and making people want to see it and cough up some of their hard-earned money, which I certainly respect. That's all about. As someone who's had to sell tickets for many years as a performing artist, once you can put those pieces together, I think the NWA has offered an opportunity that TNA never could have offered me. The attraction, and I'll be quick about it, the attraction for me with TNA was you were buying a culture that had already, spent probably in excess of $100 million in gross monies to build, the infrastructure, the office, the relationship with vendors and stuff like that, and having to start the NWA literally from scratch. That's a very expensive proposition. So there was a wisdom there, but as far as the culture of that went, I think it ended up being just perfect that we ended up with the NWA.
So the first show, before we even see anything in regards to talent or matches or even the format of the show, for me as a viewer, the second I saw the bright blue and the yellow, and I saw the background with the podium and the NWA logo in black and white with the Georgia outline of the state, I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, it's Memphis. It's 605 wrestling. It's everything that I miss about old school professional wrestling, where it felt like you were watching something unfold before your very eyes and all sorts of chaos could unfold. How, you had tried different elements over the last couple of years with 10 Pounds of Gold. At one point, Dave Lagana was following you around and releasing like little mini documentaries almost every day about you and different things that were happening with you on the road. The version that we see with NWA Powerrr now, how much of an evolution did it go through creatively before you settled on, let's do studio wrestling for the 21st century?
Well, I pitched the idea to Dixie Carter of taking over, I think it was, what was their B series? Was it Explosion?
Yeah, Explosion.
I said I could do Explosion cheaper than we were doing it in Universal if you let me do a studio wrestling show. And I couldn't sell that internally no matter how hard I tried, because I think at the end of the day, there was never any real desire to let me take over the company creatively. I was simply there to be a chip that they could play for networks and or money if they needed it, which of course it turned out to be true. And Impact Wrestling continues because I created the bridge to get it from A to C. But yeah, I'd been pitching that literally probably for the last 4 years, and even with other companies that we worked with, we talked about doing a similar concept, in combination with their talent, with the idea that we'd have a small NWA roster that we could integrate with somebody else's talent and then produce a show. Because as everyone can understand, producing studio wrestling is an economical thing. And I thought, well, given meme culture, the way people consume content, the idea of a hothouse effect of content on the fly, letting great promo people do their own business, not getting in there on every line and every period and comma, combined with the economics was something I really wanted to do. So, but the 10 Pounds of Gold series did illuminate for us over the last couple of years, and then the series that Dave and I did called 30 Days, which was around some of my musical stuff. It illuminated for us very acutely that content culture is moving very, very fast these days. And you really have to be in the 24/7 business of content, as you know, with your site. People just consume content. If they want it, they want even more of it. So it becomes about quality and it becomes about consistency. So we learned a lot that maybe you don't see necessarily on screen, but it has a lot to do with how we got there.
You mentioned the energy of letting good talkers go out and just talk. One of to me, the selling points of this has been the old school feeling of Dave Marquez or Joe Galley holding the microphone while somebody's talking, and they're not just talking into the cameras, but they're also talking right into the audience because it's such a small, confined space. But that feeling of this isn't completely scripted, and it doesn't, like, when you watch WWE in its worst moment, it's like watching high school kids doing Shakespeare without understanding what Shakespeare is supposed to be. It just, the points feel off, the verbiage is odd, you feel people speaking in ways that they're not comfortable speaking. Talk about what sort of a leeway creatively there is between, here's the idea for this segment, and then they go out and they produce it and perform it. How, talk about what it's like formatting the show versus scripting it when, in WWE or Impact or in other companies. Like how, we can say, oh, there's creative freedom, but as the person who owns the company, break down what that creative freedom truly means for the performers.
Sure. Okay. So let's just pretend we're talking about an imaginary wrestler. I would pull that wrestler aside and say, here's what we're trying to accomplish. Here's where we're going. Here's the in and here's the out. You're on your own. And literally, we're not even giving people time cues.
Really?
I mean, we're letting them run free. Absolutely. The only sort of stopgap measure is we tell Galley or Marquez, if you think it's going long, you pull the plug on the fly. But that's it. So if an Eli Drake or an Aaron Stevens or a Nick Aldis is on fire, they can run as long as they want to go. There's no limits on our talent. Literally the only thing we've said is, let's try not to curse, because we don't think that's necessary, for what we're trying to get across. But beyond that, talent has literal freedom as long as they're within the lanes of the angle.
So as we record this, I believe we just passed or we're about to hit the 1-year anniversary of Nick Aldis as the NWA champion. And over the last couple of weeks of NWA Powerrr, especially the first episode, I felt like we watched him ascend to a new level, almost like picking up the staff of power, or the sword that men like Harley Race and Luthez and Ric Flair in the past held as that traveling champion who defined everything, who carried that lineage and defined sort of the base level for the entire promotion. Talk a little bit about Nick Aldis and his importance with the NWA, because, this is a guy who was at one point on the fringes of the business after his run with Impact, and I feel like you've been able to get more mileage out of him with far less television appearances than he ever had before in his career than Impact ever did, where, it was always like, here was this guy who was on the cusp of something with Impact, and for whatever reason it never happened, and maybe, again, these are negatives that turned into positives for you, but when Nick Aldis walks out on TV on NWA Powerrr, I feel like, all right, here's the star, here's the champion, and it's a totally different feel and a totally different vibe. Talk about his involvement in the NWA and his growth as a performer and on camera and behind the scenes, and why he's become such an important cog.
Well, I think what we have to point out is that, not every talent fits in a particular system. I've been on record labels where my skill set was not appreciated, and I was literally shoved out of the way for what I would, deem lesser talents. And certainly talking to Nick, he's been in that situation a few times where he felt like he was getting over, and for whatever reason, politics or, personal things or whatever, he just didn't get that opportunity. In this case, we said to him, look, Nick, this is really on your back, and this thing will lift with you, and you tell us which way you want to go. We're partners in this, and we've literally built the thing together. It's just as much his vision, speaking from the lens of, the talent in the ring, the talent on the microphone. He's giving us his real-time feedback on what he thinks is working. And we've built the company, in many ways in his image. To his credit, I think he realized the opportunity and saw that he could mold himself in the frame of an old school champion, the way he carried himself and the way he saw himself as having to be the figurehead of the company, literally. And I think he's been able to sell that vision to talent, and I think it shows. He set a tone that I couldn't have manufactured. I mean, I could sit there and tell you all day, he's the kind of guy I wanted, and I couldn't even have told you 2 years ago that he's the guy I wanted. But now that I look back and I see the way Nick's carried himself, the match with Cody at All In, the match with Cody at NWA 70, I think these are going to go down as really historic moments when people will look back and say, that's really when the business changed. And it took someone of the depth, talent, knowledge, and real appreciation and respect for the business to even understand what kind of moment he was in. I can't say enough great things about Nick. I mean, he's made me proud. I'm proud to be in business with him, and the future's bright for him, and I hope he's with us, for the duration. But certainly he deserves, the biggest stage in the world with where he's at right now.
So, as someone who has been so immersed in professional wrestling culture and someone who loves pro wrestling so much, let's get your analysis on how you feel the first couple of episodes have gone. And looking back, is there anything that you feel already like, all right, we got to tweak this for the future? Because, to me, I felt like that first episode was one of the best initial debut episodes for any brand that I had seen in a long time. And I felt like, there was a different energy from everything else that's out there right now. But I'm curious for you, was there anything that you'd like to tweak or anything that you're already seeing like, all right, we could do this, but maybe turn up the dial a little bit on comedy so there's a little bit more levity, or maybe we need some more packages, or maybe we need more, was there anything that you weren't happy with? And, what were your thoughts on the shows as, they've been post-produced and released?
Sure. Well, starting from a negative to a positive, I think we probably tried to do too much, in that we taped 4 shows per day in the 2 days. So we taped 8, and we quite possibly could even get a 9th out of it, considering some of the content that we have in the can. And we're kind of making it up as we go along, and I say that in the best sense of the word. We didn't really understand how the audience was going to play into it. We weren't sure whether the things that we thought would work were going to come through the screen. And I think we bet on some really talented people who showed up in the moment and really delivered. So, and to the credit of the people at Georgia Public Broadcasting, some of those people had never been to a wrestling show, much less shot a wrestling show. So they were thrown in the deep end as far as camera angles and sonics and stuff like that. So I think for us it's more technical. But we're very excited and proud that we took this great gamble and bet, and it just kind of clicked. And again, it goes back to people like Nick. It goes back to people like Eli Drake. Them buying into what we're trying to accomplish. I think the locker room followed them as well.
I wanted to, one of the things I did want to ask you about is the talents that were specifically chosen, because you have talents who are around who are veterans. And you have talents who, like a Caleb Conley, who's been around but has never really had that one moment where the audience has kind of seized upon him and said, all right, that's a star. His work is great, but he's never been put creatively in that sort of position where he has that platform. And you've got names like Trevor Murdoch, Ken Anderson, Colt Cabana, and some of these guys and some of these women have had their moments and then kind of disappeared into the fringes of the business. How did you go about assembling the roster and finding that sort of balance between someone that a casual viewer may remember from a previous run elsewhere and having newer, fresher faces that the board is kind of clear and you can create and cultivate and manage and try to help them grow like a Ricky Starks? How did you find that balance for the NWA Powerrr series?
I think in this regard, I'm very much a Paul Heyman guy. I think Paul Heyman, particularly with ECW, showed that there was a lot of talent on the market that he was able to, by repackaging them or booking them in a particular way that maybe supported their skill set. And so I like to think I'm that type of a booker. And so when we talk about a talent, bringing in some like a Trevor Murdoch, to me that's a no-brainer. It has and I say this with all due respect, it has nothing to do with his past. Now, it certainly has something to do with the fact that maybe the business hasn't gone for him the way maybe he would have liked. I don't think of it like that at all. I see a super talented guy who knows exactly what he's doing in the ring, and really in many ways has been underutilized. So I think it's to our credit that we can show quite quickly why somebody like that's been underutilized. Nick's another example of somebody who's been grossly underutilized, which is kind of laughable when we consider the work that he's done for the last 2 years. And Nick was, quick to point out that, he was in main events in TNA, he was a champion. But, like you said, and I certainly felt as a fan watching back then, he never really got his just due. So what we try to say to every talent coming in is like, look, we're going to give you your best opportunity. And if you start to get over, no one's going to stop you. This company is built for talents to get over. The greatest credit we can have in the next few years is that some of the talents that we work with will go on to brighter and bigger pastures because we've been able to show the world, that the talent that we see is right there, and it just hasn't been necessarily packaged or supported in the right way. So we tend to look at it maybe like a New England Patriots. We're looking for those talents on the market that are undervalued, but we know their value, and we know that properly supported, they're going to come through the camera like they should. And so far we've been pretty right, and we're very excited about that.
My biggest fear watching the show has been, all right, here's Ken Anderson, he's got a spotlight again. Here's Trevor Murdoch, and I know, Rock and Roll Express is going to be on, and Melina. Maybe the Rock and Roll Express isn't the right example for this, the right talent to point out. But my fear almost immediately was, okay, someone's going to see them, and they're going to see what they're able to do, and it's going to click in their head, and the light bulb's going to go off. Oh yeah, they're out there. And suddenly, especially right now where there's a nuclear arms race for talent, someone's going to seize upon, oh, we could bring Ken Anderson in. Oh, we could bring Trevor Murdoch back. And even if they're not utilized in the same manner, but it's another warm body that we could use, that we could utilize. Is there a fear that by giving these talents the sort of spotlight that you're giving them, that maybe you're setting yourself up for long-term frustration where you start to lose talents over the course of different tapings?
No, we're not really particularly worried about that. We did have an incident where it was a few months ago where we had a company steal a talent from us that was under contract. And I was, considering pursuing legal action. I went to a lawyer, and the lawyer said, you absolutely have a case. We decided in that case not to, because we hadn't launched yet and really didn't want the adverse publicity, because it would just seem like more drama shit show. Because to many casual observers, it's like the last time they heard my name involved with wrestling was suing TNA. So what we've done since is we've shored up our contractual situations, and we've made it very clear to talent, what our expectations are in regards to the contracts, and we take those risks just like anybody else does when those deals are up. We're not particularly worried. We have our key talents. I think they're pretty easy to figure out who they are. And I think, as long as we feel, we're all in this business, faithfully under the letter of the law, that our expectations are pretty realistic. We don't have $1 billion to spend. So what we have to do is we have to offer something akin to, a professional franchise that says, look, when you come in here, you will have a great experience, and when you leave, you will be worth more on the market than when you came in. And so if we lose people because we can't afford the value that we've helped build into them, I think it will ultimately just be to the credit of the NWA. So we're not particularly worried about that.
Well, you mentioned you only have so much money to spend. You're investing it here. So what's the long-term goal here? Because the goal cannot be Billy Corgan and Dave Lagana want to produce NWA Powerrr to put on their social media channels forever. Obviously, you have a pay-per-view coming up in December. It immediately sells out in the studio, which is great for you. Shows immediate a very intense loyalty from your fans that are in the Georgia area already, and I'm sure fans that are traveling in from it. But there has to be a long-term play here. What is the long-term play that you're willing to kind of disclose at this point? Like, what's the plan here? Obviously, we're just 2 weeks into the show, but
sure.
You've never been someone to make a rash decision, in my opinion. Like, I remember when you bought the NWA, and I broke the initial story that you guys were looking at buying it. The reaction was, why would he do that? And my response was, he obviously has an idea, and it's going to be whatever he wants it to be. Several years later, I think anybody who questioned why you were buying it realizes why they were being silly, making that knee-jerk reaction, having that immediate hot take. But at the same time, you've gotten it to this point, but this can't be what the end game is. So in your mind, what is the end game for the NWA now that we've seen Powerrr revealed and it's been running for a couple of weeks?
Sure. Well, a little bit of context, because I think it's a really important question. One is and I'm saying this, as a model that everyone can understand, because of course it's a once in a generation type thing. The UFC, when it was for sale, was being offered from anywhere from $1 million to $2 million. And it sold, a few years ago for $4.123 billion. So obviously somebody made an investment, and people spent a lot of money building up that investment till at one point it became $1 billion company. So when you think about building a brand, you can't think strictly in terms of receipts, money coming in and money going out. The Smashing Pumpkins in the first couple of years ran basically at zero. But after 3-4 years of running at zero, we were a very high value of a band. Wrestling's a little bit different. So the way I look at it is if and I'm going to use really stupid math. If you said to me, okay, in the next 5 years you're going to lose $5 million, but the NWA in 5 years is going to be worth $15 million or $20 million as a company, you would say that was a good investment, just like a startup, a .com type brand. And so we look at our value on the market. So let me spin this into some perspective. We have money coming in now, really for the first time because of the show. So we're not that far off from being at a point where it's comfortable and not uncomfortable to run the kind of money loss that we're running. But secondarily, when you look at the market as it's shoring up right now, and I'll use your term, we're in an arms race. Well, when you look at the world of WWE and you look at the world that is being built by AEW, and of course New Japan's just announced that they're going to be trying to enter the U.S. more aggressively, and of course Impact has bought Access TV. Well, as those people are competing for viewers and attention, we're suddenly the hottest free agent on the market. We have a lot of interest from a lot of different people. Why? Because suddenly the NWA name and Nick and the championship can add box office instantly. Now, you may say a Tony Khan or a Vince McMahon doesn't want anything to do with the NWA today. 6 months from now, that may completely change when suddenly you're in a situation where adding the NWA into the picture or adding a title match with Nick into the picture is suddenly the difference between winning in a very important moment and maybe not winning that important moment. So this is where you have to look at brand value and what the brand is worth on the street as opposed to just dollars and cents. We've had tons of discussions with people about TV, and nothing is clicked because at the end of the day, and I think it's shown through the Powerrr show, I want absolute control over the product. I'm completely convinced now that we have to have absolute control over the product. Our vision, Dave Lagana's and I's vision is very different. It's obvious it's different. And where we were allowed to run free with things like, the deletion series with the Hardys and things like that, we were able to show real growth in a business that is demanding growth and wants growth. So, we're gonna ride our bet all the way down the line and see where we end up.
So you mentioned, having complete creative control over the brand. Talk a little bit about what that's been like in terms of finding the partnership with Lagana, because, Lagana's the one beating the drum and the vice president of the NWA and has been very involved in pretty much every nook and cranny of building this brand since you've purchased it. Talk a little bit about what it's like, collaborating with him creatively, and maybe, are there moments where you bang heads together because you're on polar opposite sides of a decision, and what's that like? Because obviously the partnership is working.
Right.
Talk a little bit about, finding, it's not easy to find someone that you partner with that you can always have a great creative collaboration with. You've been through how many moments where you've banged heads with people?
Wait, I think you're going to say you've been through how many band members?
I was trying to be politically correct, but you said it, not me. But like, what's it like trying to find that perfect balance with Lagana or with anybody that you're working with on a creative sense?
David and I are shockingly aligned, and I think it goes back to those 2 years in the trenches at TNA, where we had lots of offline discussions about how to deal with the politics, what we would have liked to see, and then it bears pointing out that I think the day after I was fired, in quotations, by Dixie Carter, although she had $1.83 million of my dollars in her pocket, the day after I was fired, David resigned, and David said, "I'm coming with you." So something that happened between us in those 2 years that I was at TNA, and he'd been there obviously longer, and Matt Conway, who's the other spoke in this wheel that maybe doesn't get enough credit, even though Matt's not necessarily in the wrestling business, Matt was there working with us during the tapings, and remains a very close friend. the relationship that we formed in that and sort of really dealing with wrestling on a day-to-day basis, that carried out the door when I left TNA and Dave came with me. And we spent months saying, what are we going to do? Are we going to start Billy Corgan Wrestling? And then, of course, we fell on the idea of purchasing the NWA. And that started this crazy journey. So Dave was with me through the lawsuit, with Impact and with Dixie, and he's been there with me every step of the way, and we're shockingly aligned. It's pretty crazy. And I think Dave's television background really comes into play. I follow Dave down the rabbit hole a lot. I'll pitch a lot of my crazy ideas, and he rarely says, "Oh, that's a bad idea." He's always like, "I like what you're saying, but maybe we just tweak it this little bit." So it's a lot of tweaking, and it gets so blurry on the tweaking. At some point, we can't even remember whose idea it was first. But what you're really seeing there with 10 Pounds of Gold and the Powerrr series, it's really a shared vision. To his credit, he said, "Look, you're the one putting the money on the line. I'm going to follow you because you're the one with the real risk here." And so he's been incredibly supportive, and I can't between him and Nick Aldis, I mean, that's where my real pride comes in. I'm really proud of the roster that we're putting out there right now, but when you really look at the guys behind the scenes, Nick being one of them, Josephus being another, that have really stood there with me through these 2 years as we figured out this business model, and then finally made our decision to jump into the market full force. It's been incredible. It's a great story of just guys trusting each other and putting their egos aside and really saying, let's just do what's best for the business and really let's get this thing across.
How much has the phone started ringing from people who were perhaps trepidatious, I'll use the word, about the chances of this working, versus now they are extremely excited to come on board and potentially be part of this? Because I feel like the duality of being a wrestling promoter is the second you decide to do it, everyone's your best friend. But the second you start to make your decisions, suddenly the people that were your best friends are now angry about these decisions that you've made because they don't benefit you. I've seen it or benefit them, I should say. I've seen it with lots of independent wrestling promoters on upwards the ladder. So, how crazy how quickly have the tides turned from people who are like, I'm not so sure about this, to put me in, coach, I'm ready to play?
Yeah, the phone's definitely ringing, but we've had a long 2 years here, 2-year window of seeing how people have really, there was that initial thing when I bought the company, the phone rang off the hook because everyone saw there was an easy payday there. And then we got these kind of weird questions like, well, if you guys aren't running TV, what are you doing? We'd say things like, well, we're brand building. Well, what does that mean? And then we'd run a show like, we ran NWA 70 1 year ago. We drew the biggest gate in the history of the fairgrounds. And then people are like, okay, what's next? And you're like, well, we've proven that can work, but that's not necessarily where we need to be. We really need to have a TV content model. And then we got in the relationship with the Ring of Honor. So all along the way, we've seen people kind of come and go. So in many ways, it's kind of worn out as welcome. We're very, very cynical about why people are calling. And look, at the end of the day, it's a business. It's an independent contractor business. So I don't really mind the phone calls. I don't really mind the email from the friend you haven't heard from for 4 months that suddenly wants to know because the show's just debuted and, racked up 500,000 views on social media. It doesn't really bother me because at the end of the day, they need to earn their money, and especially if I'm friendly with particular talents, I want them to succeed.
What lessons have you and Lagana and Team NWA learned from the algorithms from the different platforms? Is there any information that you can wean from it this early on in the race in terms of how certain talents are getting over, or what sort of, is the Austin Idol commercial, getting over? Like, I popped huge for the Tony Falk cameo. Things like that. Like, it's like
we got more coming.
Like, I'm just waiting for George South to show up. I feel like that's the ultimate cameo for the NWA. But, what sort of, information have we been able to wean from the impressions and the algorithms and things like that from Facebook and YouTube and whatnot that show that, all right, we're on the right path here, or maybe this is something that's taking off that we didn't even expect when we were putting these shows together?
I think, I'm answering the question a little more generally, and I'll try to be more specific, is I think, what we've seen early with the head-to-head battle between NXT and AEW is that there are a lot of fans out there that want an alternate choice for their wrestling. And so we've benefited from AEW Dark, in terms of people coming from the AEW socials being recommended by YouTube over to the NWA. So what that tells me is that audience that wants an alternate content to, let's call it the WWE universe, and of course many of them do watch the WWE. It's not a black or white versus, but that crowd that wants something different or is looking for something different is finding the NWA, and they're staying and they're coming back. So I think it's really cool to be part of something maybe a little earlier than we would have expected. And that's fine. That's great. And certainly, working with Ring of Honor has benefited from that, and obviously Ring of Honor's relationship benefited, the Elite guys. So, that larger pool of things that is happening that runs through New Japan, Ring of Honor, AEW, and now the NWA, I think there's something going on there, and I think the data still isn't all in, and no pun intended, but I think it'll take us a few years to where all of us, including yourself, will look back and say, wow, there was a bigger wave coming than we could have even imagined. And I do credit Tony Khan for having a sense that wave could be commoditized and taken advantage of, and putting his money where his mouth is, and putting up big bucks to get them on Turner and crafting a deal. Because if you'd asked me a year ago, I would say, yeah, there's definitely an alternative crowd out there, but not as big as people think it is. And now I'm starting to realize that it actually is that big.
With the reaction that you've had to the show thus far, is there already a sense of, hey, maybe we should put it into a bigger building because we could get back more people in? Or is it sort of the mentality of the smaller the club, the more intimate the club, the better the vibe of the show?
Sure. I think, allow me to answer this slightly differently. I think what I see a lot of early on, and it kind of makes me laugh, is, and maybe this is just, keep it simple, stupid wrestling crowd stuff, but they suddenly have decided the NWA is kind of like the throwback league. It's totally incorrect. We love embracing the legacy of the NWA. It gives me a lot of pleasure, and I think it's very honorable to the people that I grew up watching. But the NWA is ultimately going to be, quite possibly the most forward-leaning company in the world. It's just taking us time to build that to our vision. So to us, the NWA Powerrr show is exactly what it is. It's meant to be a studio wrestling show. And even as we pitched it to different people in the wrestling business, and obviously it's easier to pitch it now that it's up and running, we've always said we don't see it as a 50-week-a-year series. I think it would be ideal if it was, somewhere between a 30 or 40-week-a-year series, so that it wouldn't burn itself out, we wouldn't burn the crowd out, and it could be more of a fun thing, like a high voltage thing when it was there, and then when it went away, you would miss it until it came back. We don't see it as a 50-week-a-year content model, nor do we think we would ever even have to run a 50-week-a-year content model. Personally, and this is just my personal opinion, I think that the 50-week-a-year, 52-week-a-year content model is outdated for the way people are consuming media. And it puts a lot of pressure on the companies to churn out a lot of stuff that maybe they don't feel particularly strong about. I'm more on the other side. I'd rather put out less and have it be of a higher quality. And so that's my thinking, is that maybe the NWA would be represented by 3, 4, 5 different series in the end that wouldn't run all the time, and maybe in that it would create a kind of a different vision of our world, if that makes any sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. With the advent of NWA Powerrr, what does this mean? This came up to me in my mind because you mentioned the multiple series. 10 pounds of gold, how does the NWA Powerrr series change how consistently we see 10 pounds of gold going forward?
I would like it to be, consistently run. I think the story of what goes on behind the scenes, getting to Powerrr, getting in a Powerrr, if we're talking about like right now, this particular time frame, we're talking about hiring more people to create more content. And Dave was just pitching me on another series idea he has right now that's sort of related around the Powerrr series. And so it's very possible within the next 2-3 months we'll have consistently, three full-time series running.
So let's talk about NWA Powerrr. The latest episode is going to air on Tuesday evening at 6:05 p.m. What can fans expect from the third episode of the series? And I don't want to give away all the matches because I know certain segments are set up over the course of the show. But obviously we'll see a follow-up on Tim Storm, which was mentioned, and we'll see what his future will entail in the NWA. But talk a little bit about what fans can expect from NWA Powerrr this week.
I can tell you that Aaron Stevens is back for another round. I know he wants to share a clip from his movie, his yet unreleased movie. We've got more commercials in store. You'll see Eli Drake. You'll see James Storm. So it's hard because I don't want to give away what we're doing because the show is meant to be kind of on the fly. And even at one of the shows, Jim Cornette was complaining, I'd love to promote next week, but we just don't know what's going to happen. And that's actually true. We don't necessarily smarten up the announcers as to what's going to happen because we want that natural sense of chaos in the room.
Has there been a moment yet where there's been too much chaos and you're like, all right, this went a little farther than we thought?
Oh yeah, of course.
So as the promoter and the owner, do you want to like tell the guys, hey, you gotta rein it in a little bit, or do you just feel like, you know what, we just gotta go with it because it's what happened?
No, that's really on me. I'm the one who's put all this together, and I'm the one who's creating, the wide open parameters. So if it spins out of control, and it has a few times, that's really on me. It's not on the talent. And so that's something I think we'll work harder to be clear about going forward, and obviously it's on me to write clear narratives and make sure that the direction is there. And I'd like to throw a little praise to my old boss, John Burke, because John Burke used to make us walk through segments, before TNA shows, and I used to go, oh my God, do I have to walk through this segment for 30 minutes? But to his credit, that is something we probably should have done a little bit more of, because there were times where, because we were shooting too much in one day, people were just getting confused, and like I said, that's really on me. So I think we'll run a tighter ship next time, and I think we'll keep the into the fire flame at a low boil.
You know what? Here's one of the number one questions I've received is, why was the decision made to use Dokken for the theme song of the show when you've got obviously a massive catalog of your own? Was that a conscious decision not to use your own music? Oh
yeah, I mean, I really don't want the show to be about me. I really want it to be about the talent. And I went, I thought, okay, if we're going to kind of do a good wink here back to another time, can we find a song that I think will embody the spirit of what I'm after? And it's really funny because I did a deal to get the song, and I've actually played with George Lynch, the guitar player at Dokken, so I know him a little bit, so that may have helped to get the deal done. But anyway, I arranged to get the song licensed for the show, and I sent it to Nick Aldis, and I sent it to Dave Lagana. And of course, they didn't say anything until after the show aired, but they later told me they weren't completely sure about the song, right? And that's when I told Lagana, like, I think you can trust me in the music department. You know what I mean? Like, you could question all you want my wrestling acumen, but when it comes to music, like, you might want to get out of the way.
I think that one's an understatement. So we mentioned briefly Dave Marquez, Joe Galley, and Jim Cornette. Talk about the decision making to make them the voices of the NWA. And I mean, the Cornette one obviously speaks for itself. I don't think there's anybody alive who could embody that sort of knowledge and education and passion for what you're trying to do. But talk a little bit about Joe Galley and Dave Marquez growing into those roles and why they were tapped.
Well, the relationship with Dave Marquez came, of course, through David Lagana and working with Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. And when I would go out there occasionally for shows, Joe Galley at that time was the week-to-week announcer for Dave Marquez. And I remember pulling Lagana aside probably a year and a half, maybe even 2 years ago, and saying, "That's the future voice of the NWA." There's so much talent, and Joe is just starting to hit his stride. I think we'll look back at Joe in 10 years and see him at the level of other great announcers in the business. Because to wrestling fans, that are sort of in my age group, I think you'll appreciate the thing that made Gordon Solie so great was he was straight in his announcing. He announced the wrestling a little bit more like a sports play-by-play guy. He, of course, knew what he was doing, and he was great at working in the business, but he kept it kind of sober, and I think Joe Galley's that type of voice. I'm not a fan of people who overhype. I think Joe's just pitch right. So when you've got a guy who's very hyperbolic like Jim Cornette, I think that's a nice balance. Jim can be color, Jim can go off the rails, and there's Joe just keeping it straight. Dave Marquez, what can you say? He's built his own empire with the Championship Wrestling series, and he's been a great partner to us since the very beginning. It was Dave who had recommended, that I should consider buying the NWA. I had actually looked into buying the NWA for TNA at one point, because of TNA's history with the NWA, because I wanted to try to bring back some credibility to TNA, because as everybody remembers that, there was a lot of struggle there with credibility. I had considered it in another frame, but it was Dave Marquez who focused me and said, I think you can get it. And we talked about what he thought I could get it for, and so that kind of led me down that path. And, Dave's just been an incredible partner. So it's a real joy to have him involved because, as somebody who worked with Harley Race and somebody who really loves the era of wrestling that David Lagana and I love, Dave knows exactly what he's doing on that set. And one quick funny story, he had a bunch of notes, interview notes and things like that we'd gone over in the production meeting. And in I think maybe the second or third segment, Tom Latimer knocks the podium over, and not only do Dave's notes scatter everywhere, but they get water on them and they all smear. So he had to work the first day with no notes. So there's your NWA Powerrr behind the scenes moment. So there's some moments in some of these shows where I'll text Dave Lagana and say, why is Marquez doing XYZ? Because he didn't have his notes,
I think he's the perfect mix of a ham for television and someone who knows how to get the most out of someone during the interview segment. He does enough to endear himself, but not so much that it's overbearing. And that's not easy in television in general, to kind of have that sort of balance. I think he does a good job. And, it's funny, you mentioned Joe Galley being the straight-laced sort of announcer. I almost felt like they were shades of early Joey Styles with him. Not the Joey Styles we saw later on, but very early on in the ECW run where Joey was sort of like, Joey Styles here reporting on blah, 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 and the franchise Shane Douglas just had this happen, and it was almost like, it was like a broadcaster throwing to different things, and I felt like a lot of, Joe Galley was kind of like a more, I don't want to say hyped up, but a more passionate version of that version of Joey Styles, but had his own way of calling things. It wasn't like a knockoff, but you could see all right, there's some shades of Gordon Solie in there, a little Lance Russell and a little Joey Styles, all of which to me are huge compliments if I'm thinking that when I'm watching someone. And
just one quick note, even if I didn't own the NWA, a Lance Russell or a Gordon Solie, that's the style of announcing I would want for any company I had. So the fact that it's the NWA makes it even easier, but that is the style I think that best tells the type of wrestling that I want to get across.
So obviously we're still very early on in the run here, but given the huge passionate response that you've gotten thus far and the numbers that we're seeing thus far for the series, does it make you, how do you keep yourself from getting too far ahead of yourself and going, all right, well, let's run, let's go run New York. Let's go run Nashville again. No. How do you maintain, how do you kind of stay the course and not suddenly burn this out? What's your mentality for that as someone who's watched, bands rise and fall very quickly and you've gone through your own highs and lows over the years? Building this, it's never gonna be done. There's no such thing as perfection when you're creating content. But how do you keep yourself from just running off the rails and deciding, all right, we've got the people here, we've got them, let's go run the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York in 2 months? How do you keep yourself from doing that?
I think it's pretty easy. I think the fact that I own the company 100% and I'm my own boss in this with Dave Lagana. We just set goals, and so the next goal is to run the live pay-per-view December 14th. And I think how many people tune in to see that pay-per-view and the result of that pay-per-view, and whether or not we can run a successful pay-per-view out of that studio as opposed to a traditional larger venue with the LED boards and stuff like that. And certainly NWA 70 and the Crockett Cup proved that we can run a successful pay-per-view. But in this case, we'll be running the pay-per-view on our own, where in the last case we ran it through a Ring of Honor in the Fight Club, thanks to Joe Koff. So I think our motto is always like walk before you run. That's why I always tell people this is really a 20-year plan, and we're not going to go any faster than anybody wants us to go. It's tempting sometimes. I would love to be on the phone right now with you and tell you that we're running 25, 30 shows in the next year, like the New Japan of America. I can't remember what it's going to be called, but how they're announcing they're going to run about 25 shows. I'd love to tell you that, but I think it's a very tough market. AEW is obviously sucking up a lot of the oxygen, as far as what they're doing. They're selling a lot of tickets on top of the WWE product, and WWE at times has struggled to sell tickets. So I think you got to be really careful, sort of throwing yourself out there, because why would we? We're winning right now with where we're at. We'd like to just slow down and savor it for a second. We're very honest and transparent with our talents, what our expectations are, and thankfully many of them have come along for the ride, and hopefully they'll feel it's a positive experience.
We mentioned earlier that Fight.tv is going to be carrying the pay-per-view and going to be carrying the weekly NWA Powerrr series. Will that begin this week? Will the series also appear on Fight.tv starting this week?
I think it is up now, and we're very happy about that. And then the pay-per-view will be on Fight on December 14th.
All right, and I guess I've hit on everything I wanted to discuss. So is there anything that you want to tell the wrestling fan out there that hasn't had the chance to experience NWA Powerrr for themselves, or looks upon a small studio show and goes, I want to see Pyro and things like that, and
Sure.
kind of pitch them as why they should, look at this more intimate version of professional wrestling that is more chaos-based and more talking-based and more along the lines of the type of DNA for pro wrestling that worked for so many years in different parts of the country for many decades before the Vince McMahon push that destroyed all the little territories. Why should they sample the NWA if they've kind of dismissed the idea or they've never had the chance to watch it before?
I think that, and this was one of my big complaints when we were in TNA, like, why do you want to be like the other companies? The NWA is set out on a journey to be unlike any company in the world, and we've begun to do that. We've begun to separate ourselves, and we say that proudly, and that's not to denigrate what everyone else is doing. In my estimation, and this is my own personal opinion, in terms of the production side, nobody does it better in the world than the McMahons. I was at WrestleMania last year. The size and scope of whatever those LED walls and the sound systems and the pyro, I mean, it just blows your mind. So if you're a company like the NWA, you're so far away from that. That's not even remotely on our radar. So what we have to do to the fan out there is prove that what we're offering is worth their time in a different way. Maybe we're a little bit more creative. Maybe we're a little edgier. Maybe we have a different sort of take on how to use particular talents. And over time, I think, and give us a year or two, I think you'll start to see that there's a very, very different vision. And I don't mean this negatively against what you were saying. If you look at the NWA right now and you think that's the NWA 2 years from now, 5 years from now, you're sadly mistaken. That's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle we're going to put together. And if we get where we want to get, we'll be like no other content-generating wrestling company in the world. And it'll be very, very apparent the way we do our business, the way we utilize our talents, and the way we market our talents. There'll be nobody even remotely close to the way we do it, and we think that'll be a good thing. And so it's very much the way I feel about my music career. If somebody doesn't like what I do, I'm cool with that as long as they respect why I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't see any upside for us being like the other kids on the block, especially when we don't have the kind of money to burn. If I had money to burn, would I be using Pyro? I can't say I would be. I think I would probably spend it either in finding in developing a young talent, or I think I would put the money elsewhere, because I just think that in many ways, in my estimation, those facets of the business have sort of burned themselves out. And I'll give you a perfect example: the fact that we don't use entrance music on NWA Powerrr. Some of the talents didn't understand. David Lagana certainly was confused by the whole idea, but I think it's part of what sets the show apart, and it sets a different pace for the show. Now we'll have entrance music for the pay-per-view, which is fine. And it'll feel special because we're doing it there. But in terms of the show, I wanted the show to run at a certain pace. And so as far as I was concerned, the entrance music was the sacrificial lamb on that. That's the way I want to do stuff. And if people criticize and they say, oh, I don't like it, or I want this or that, that's totally fine. It's totally cool. But we have a vision for a reason. I could blow more money. I mean, I've got money. But I'm only going to blow money if I think it's going to get us where we want to go.
Fair enough. All right. So before we get out of here, I have one last question for you. You have mentioned many times, and even during this interview, you mentioned you have a 20-year plan. At this point, how far along are you from where you were expected to be in that 20-year plan?
I'd say we're probably more on year 3 than year 2, so I'd say that's pretty good.
Hey, if you're ahead of the curve, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think and let me just point out one small thing. When I bought the NWA, I was looking at a landscape that didn't include AEW and Tony Khan. The Khan family is worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 billion. They have an NFL franchise, and they have a United Premiership League, English Premiership League team. They have vast resources. They have access to media that I don't have. So, we have to go about building this in a much different way, at a much different pace. And so what we're really relying on is the credibility of the talent in the ring, and the credibility of what we're trying to offer people like yourself. We're not wasting your time. That we're an alternate type of product for a good set of reasons. That, like I said, even if you don't like what we're doing, you can at least appreciate why we're trying to do what we're doing. And so, yeah, we're definitely ahead of that curve. And I feel pretty good about where we're standing. If you had told me, that we would have had, I think we're in the excess over 2 weeks of 800,000 views between the two shows, that money would start to pour in. The people would be for commercials. That we'd actually start getting money to run commercials on the show. We'd have no network. We'd have complete control, and I wouldn't have given up 1% of the company. I wouldn't have believed. I would have said, wow, how is that even possible? That would take 3-4 years to even get somewhere like there. So we're really excited about where we are, and we can't thank those who've given us a chance. We can't thank you enough, and those who haven't seen it, give it a shot. It's a fun, quick hour.
All right. Well, for more information on all things National Wrestling Alliance, it's very easy. Go to nationalwrestlingalliance.com. You can find out all the details on their December TV tapings. The pay-per-view is already sold out, but they've got tapings on December 15th and the 16th for NWA Powerrr. And, of course, the series will continue to air every Tuesday at 6:05 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Fight.tv, on the NWA's YouTube and the NWA's Facebook page, and possibly, I would assume probably, more platforms to come. And, sir, I just want to thank you for sitting down and giving us so much of your time. And is there anything that we didn't cover that you kind of wanted to touch upon before we get out of here?
No, man. Just it's the old saying, more is more, right? So more wrestling is more wrestling.
There you go.
It's a good time to be in the business.
It's a good time to be a wrestling fan. It's almost like you have to have a full-time job to enjoy wrestling.
Like you.
Yeah, I know. And some days I wonder how I'm going to continue to keep up this pace, but that's life. You can't be upset with the blessings that you've been given, because if it was
the old saying is be careful what you wish for.
Indeed. But one thing everyone wished for, I think, if they were an NWA fan, is its resurgence. And we're in the middle of watching that happen right now, thanks to the NWA president, Billy Corgan. And I want to say thank you to everybody for listening to this interview. Check out the NWA on social media and at their official website. And, of course, if you are not an elite subscriber to PW Insider, you can check out PWInsiderElite.com, and you can check out everything that we do, just like tons of conversations like this for 3 days ad-free. And you can find all that information at the website I just mentioned. And until next time, I want to thank everybody again for listening. I'm Mike Johnson. And Billy, thank you again for sitting down with us, and look forward to when we get the chance to do it again down the line.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike.